Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we're going to be continuing our conversation surrounding the Judy Brown murder case, as well as some of the other crimes that had occurred around the same time. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, we recommend you do so before listening to this one so that you're not lost. With that said, today's episode is part 2 of the murder of Judy Brown. Last week, we left off with the realization that Judy's murder was now the 6th murder in the area in just a few short months. Continuing on from there, we're going to be covering several of those crimes, but don't worry, we will come back around to Judy's case in particular. So, between October of 1982 and January of 1983, literally January 5th, so very, very beginning of January, there had actually been 5 other murders in Morris County, and now by the time that Judy was killed in the first week of January, that was now the 6th on that list. And all of those murders were still unsolved. The crime rate had shot up significantly during this time compared to the previous 2 years. According to reporting in the Central New Jersey Home News, there were only 2 homicides in Morris County in 1980 and 4 in 1981. But now, in just this 3-month span of time, there were already 6. That is a wildly high jump.
That makes me think back to Mary Thomas and David Johnson.
Yeah.
Because that was a similar thing going on there. It was a place that didn't have a lot of crime, and then most recently, crime spiked, and then all of a sudden this entire family is found dead in the same bed.
Yeah. It's like, what are the factors that will all of a sudden make all these people want to murder other people? Like, it's just so strange.
Or is it one person that's going through doing it all, or what's
in
their
this
motive,
case,
or
I don't think so. But before we continue on with Judy's case, I do want to give you some information about these other cases that took place around that time, just so you really understand the gravity of the situation plaguing the area at the time. So let's just back up a little bit, and I'll give you some information on the other 5 murders. So, back on October 1st, 1982, a 16-year-old boy named Christopher Thomas was shot to death at the Rockaway Town Square Mall, which was only about a 15-minute drive from the Arlington Plaza Shopping Center where Judy was found deceased. And Christopher's case was actually one I had on my list to look into, but I hadn't gotten a chance to start my research and produce a full episode on just yet. So I was very surprised when I began my research on Judy's case and saw that these two happened in the same area in such a close time frame. And Christopher's case was one that authorities believed could have been connected to Judy's in the early days of their investigation, specifically due to their belief that the gun used to kill Judy was a small caliber handgun, as the same type of weapon was used to kill Christopher Thomas. However, once authorities discovered that the murder weapon in Judy's case could have actually been a shotgun, and the circumstances of both cases showed clear differences, it was ruled out that the two had any connection to each other. So then, just weeks after Christopher Thomas was killed, on October 21st, 1982, a 34-year-old man named James Wesco was stabbed to death at the Madison train station in Madison, New Jersey, and that was only about also a 15-minute drive from where Judy was found. Less than a month after that, a man named Donald Mata was found killed in a hotel room in Parsippany, New Jersey, on November 17th, 1982. 2 sex workers were actually later charged for putting a drug called scopolamine in his drink and poisoning him to death. The motive for Donald's murder appeared to be robbery. Then, the following month, on November 23rd, 1982, a 19-year-old girl named Amy Hoffman never came home after working her shift at a store located at the Morris County Mall, and 2 days later, on Thanksgiving Day, her body was found. It was determined she'd been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Less than 2 weeks after that, on December 5th, 1982, a 25-year-old woman named Deirdre O'Brien was brutally attacked and also sexually assaulted and stabbed. After her attack, she'd actually been able to get away and made it to a truck driver at a rest stop and was able to tell this trucker what her attacker looked like. Unfortunately, though, she ended up succumbing to her injuries and later died. Again, these two cases were ruled out as being connected to Judy's due to the differences in the murder weapon, a gun versus a knife, and the fact that these two women were sexually assaulted where Judy was not. So, John, before you comment, I did want to send you a link that, again, I think it might have been a Reddit user that created this, but they had gone and made essentially a Google map that showed like the distance of where all these crimes took place. So you can like get an idea of really how close in not only time frame, but also proximity all of these murders happened.
Okay. I mean, looking at this, it does seem as though all of these crimes happened in air quotes here, relatively close proximity, because something I was thinking about and something I would advise people anytime that you're putting something like this together, where you're creating a map and you're trying to say, oh, this happened here, you need to have some type of scale.
Yes, agreed.
And there is no scale on this map. So I don't know if these happen, hundreds of miles between each other. Obviously, I can guess that it didn't, but you need some type of scale to really be able to gauge the distance. Otherwise, you got to have people looking at your map, trying to zoom in, trying to figure out where these points actually are, and then measure them through their own means. But same thing when you're photographing stuff. If you're photographing evidence, you need to have something on there to scale, whether it be a ruler,
a quarter,
whatever.
Yeah, a pencil, something.
Well, not a pencil, because what if it's been sharpened?
Oh, that's true. Good point.
You want something that is always a standard size, a dollar bill, a quarter, a ruler, stuff like that.
Makes sense. So before we continue on, I do just want to let you know that it was believed almost immediately, due to the circumstances involved, that both Amy and Deirdre were killed by the same perpetrator, and their cases were actually later solved and their killer brought to justice.
So when you were talking about this earlier, I didn't want to interrupt you, but it seemed as though these two young females could have been connected.
Definitely.
Both stabbed, sexually assaulted, both in generally the same area, similar age. Whereas they may not be connected to Judy's. Yeah. It shows that somebody that is committing crimes in this area is committing crimes and murdering multiple people.
Yes, absolutely. So this guy that ended up charged with their two cases, his name is James Kodetich, I think. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name. But I just had to tell you about how this guy ended up on police's radar for Amy and Deirdre's cases, because obviously we can already tell that the Morris County Sheriff's Office and Prosecutor's Office and whoever else, they do not have a good track record at this point of solving their murders in their county. We've got 6 cases that are unsolved now.
I mean, they're also being bombarded with cases when they have gone generally years beforehand where they had 1 or 2, and now over a 3-month period they're getting 6. They may not have the resources to be able to solve these.
Which is something that we're going to get into in a little bit, but still, it's
state
not
police,
not
which is
necessarily...
why I said you bring in the state police, because they got more resources,
well,
but whatever.
They bring in someone else, so we'll get into that in a minute. He apparently called police in mid-January of 1983, so this was about a month and a half after Deirdre's murder. And he called and said, hey, I've been stabbed by someone. Can you come help me? Like,
what?
Literally, he had like
stabbed by a sex worker that had a knife on them to protect themselves?
No, who knows, maybe, and he's lying about the situation. I think he said like he got like pulled over from some random other person. It was some woman who came and stabbed him. Like, you bet he probably tried to attack somebody else.
Right.
And
he probably tried to pick up a sex worker, and the sex worker, knowing that you have these creeps out here that are going to try and attack you.
And all these murders happening in the area.
And all the murders, on top of that,
Yeah.
So they probably have some type of protection with them, obviously outside of like the buddy system that we've seen them use before.
Yeah.
You have a knife on you. This guy does some shady shit and you shank him.
Good point. I didn't even think about that before. So that's probably what happened. But either way, he calls for an ambulance. He's like, someone help me. I've been stabbed. As he's already now allegedly murdered 2 people. But this ambulance comes to his house and they're going to be transporting him to an area hospital. But of course, he's been stabbed. You would assume that authorities are going to arrive on scene since he's alleging a crime, right? So when they get there, they see his car. And his car matches the description of the car that was seen at the mall where Amy went missing from, at the rest stop where Deirdre was attacked.
You don't say.
And then they're like, oh shit, I bet this could be our guy. They get a search warrant. They look in his car. They apparently find, I think it was clothing fibers that matched both Amy and Deirdre. Must have been like whatever they were last seen wearing. And so he ended up like linked to both of these cases.
Just like what you said in last episode, in part 1, criminals are stupid.
Exactly.
A lot of them
Why?
are,
Like,
but-
why? Go to the hospital yourself.
Right.
Like, why are you calling an ambulance to come to your house when you know that the car that you used in commission of these 2 crimes is parked there and you know police are going to come because you just said you were stabbed?
Right. I would drive to the hospital.
Uh-huh.
I mean, obviously, I would not be
In this
a bad
situation,
person,
of
but
course not.
I would drive to the hospital, and then I would say, oh, as I was trying to get out of my car, somebody tried to mug me and they stabbed me.
Exactly.
Come up with some type of...
Yes. Like, he's an idiot. So he ends up charged. He goes to trial, and he was found guilty for both murders, and he was sentenced to death for Amy's.
Really?
And life in prison for Deirdre, because I don't believe the jury was able to conclusively come to a unanimous decision for the death penalty on that case. But he ended up having his death sentence commuted at some point and was given life in prison, I believe, to be served concurrently with the other life sentence. But the thing that's absolutely wild is that this guy had literally gotten out of prison mere months prior to Amy and Deirdre's murders, after serving only 11 years of a 15-year sentence for the murder of his previous roommate in Florida.
It's crazy. Anytime that there is such a vicious crime as a murder,
Uh-huh.
I understand manslaughter is sometimes accidental, but like when you have a murder,
I think he strangled them. You can't accidentally strangle someone.
you should never be able to get out early.
No.
And
You should
just while
also
I-
not have gotten 15 years for murder. I'm sorry. That's dumb.
No, you took somebody's entire life away, so you should lose your entire life in prison.
Exactly.
If not,
Exactly.
the death penalty. But while I have the opportunity, you always get on your soapbox. I want to get on my soapbox.
Ooh, let's hear it. I love
Now-
your soapboxes.
I understand that all states don't support the death penalty, and the death penalty can be a touchy subject sometimes because we do have wrongful convictions, and if you execute somebody that was wrongfully convicted, like there's no coming back from that.
Absolutely.
As much as it sucks if they, serve 20 years of a, life sentence and then they're commuted after that, at least they have some of their life remaining where they can choose to use it as they see fit.
Yep.
But if you have a case that has so much evidence, it is like without question that somebody is guilty. I say, once the jury has found them guilty, you allow the victim's family members to decide if they want the death penalty or not.
Yes, I think you've said this before.
I'll say it until the cows come home.
Yes.
I think you need to give some agency to the family members that are affected by these tragedies to say, okay, for me, I have closure and peace and knowing that this person's going to serve their life in prison with no chance of parole is good for me. Or if somebody says, no, you killed my child, you don't deserve to live. I think you have to give agency to families.
I agree. Some families might decide that that's not for them, and they say, I'll leave it up to the prosecutor, I'll leave it up to the jury, or whatever.
Right.
You
If
give
they don't want
them
blood
the
on their
decision.
hands, proverbially or whatever.
Yeah, you give them the decision to say, do you want to do this? Do you not want to do this? I think that's fair.
Right. Once somebody is found guilty.
And it wasn't the family that found him guilty. It was a jury of their peers, or it was the judge, whatever they choose.
And again, just to preface and to, pad my opinion here, if there is no shred of a doubt that this person is guilty, because
Yes.
you
Like,
know,
straightforward DNA,
right,
100% could not be anybody
or a
else.
confession or something, or
I
is they're
don't
on
know.
video.
I don't know. I got my opinions on confessions.
Okay, so let's say they're on video doing it.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Sure,
Yeah, that'll work.
but I'm off my soapbox now.
Yes.
So let's keep going.
Okay, so I do just want to say as well that after this guy, James, however you pronounce his last name, was arrested and charged, he was required to provide samples of hair and saliva and blood. And I believe those might have potentially, not 100% sure, kind of assuming here, but have been compared in Judy's case.
I mean, generally when somebody is charged with a felony, part of, at least nowadays, police's process is to conduct a buccal swab, which is to collect saliva DNA from inside the mouth and stuff. So it is now in a database,
Yes.
at least.
Yes.
So I would say it could have been at any time of the process.
Yeah.
Once he's been charged, once he's been convicted, whatever.
Yeah. So I think it's relatively safe to say that if they had DNA, if they had fingerprints, if they had anything like that in Judy's case, and there was never any sort of match to this guy, he most likely had no involvement there. I didn't think he did, but it was still something that was mentioned in reporting. You know, they were taking this information in the beginning. You know, they were looking at anyone and everyone because they didn't have really any good suspects on their radar. So it's like, oh, we just found someone that is literally being charged with this. We can't not look at him in Judy's case.
Right.
But I also want to say, too, in recent years, like I think as recently as 2017, he was trying to like get in touch with the Innocence Project, and he wants his DNA tested, and he wants samples taken from Amy's body tested against his DNA. But then he also didn't say anything about Deirdre's case. So like, why wouldn't you want DNA tested in hers? Mm-hmm. You were given 2 life sentences.
But if there wasn't conclusive evidence in one that didn't allow the jury to deliberate on the death penalty, and that's an easier one to go after, then you go after one and then whatever else. I mean, when you're in prison, you have nothing but time to deliberate on what you're going to do with the rest of your life.
And do all these other things. So,
right.
But yeah, as of today, I haven't found anything in regards to if that DNA has been retested. So not sure. As of December 29th, 2022, I don't have that answer for you.
Okay, and he's still in prison at this point?
He is, yes. Yep, serving 2 life sentences. All right, so let's get back on track a little bit here. So as I mentioned earlier, it was a little confusing regarding who the investigating agency was. We kind of nailed down, we're pretty sure it was Morris County. But I think a lot of the confusion had to do with the fact that, like, hello, there's 6 murders, and what are we going to do? Who's going to work on these? Technically, they're in Morris County, but they're all in different towns, so kind of all over the place. But as it turns out, there were actually numerous agencies working all of these cases. As we know, they were all still unsolved, at least by the time Judy had been killed. We know that, James had been arrested by mid-January, but this was like an all-hands-on-deck situation. And it was reported that there were upwards of 100 investigators working these 6 cases, with 33 officers from the state police, 15 individuals from the prosecutor's office, and the rest of the officers assigned all came from other police departments local to the Morris County area. Now, I think it's obvious that anyone living in this area had to be especially concerned for their safety when this many murders occurred in such a short span of time.
Especially when there wasn't a history of this type of crime for at least a few years prior.
Exactly.
Not to this extent, anyway.
Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, there was so much reporting regarding personal safety, and there were a bunch of interviews done with locals, and reporters were going to the malls and just like talking to people outside the malls, because it seemed like a lot of these cases were happening within all of the local malls. And people were saying, oh, I'm leaving work earlier than normal to get home before dark. Women were being escorted to their cars after work. People were using the buddy system. They were installing home security. They were installing burglar alarms, all that. And the wild thing is, well, I guess it's not really wild to think, but like the sales of alarms went way up, the sales of knives and mace skyrocketing. Even the adoption of large dogs increased because people were doing anything and everything that they could to try and protect themselves. Which I don't blame them in any way, shape, or form. I would do the exact same thing.
I don't either. I mean, in recent years when, obviously the world is what it is. I mean, we saw a drastic increase in firearm adoption over the past few years. I mean, there's an increase in crime across the country, generally in major cities. So it only makes sense that when people feel as though that they are in danger, that they take the steps that they think are necessary to protect themselves and their family.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to read just a couple statements from locals for you so you can, kind of see what people were saying at the time. So the first came from the Daily Record, and this was an interview with a man that was interviewed outside of a store at the Arlington Plaza Shopping Center, which was the same place where Judy's body had been found. And he stated, quote, what they need here is better security. They should have 2 unmarked police cars patrolling the area. That's the best way to stop it. In more than 60 years, I've never seen anything like this. We've ruled out shopping at night, end quote. So then there was this couple that was interviewed by the Daily Record who'd recently moved to the area, and they stated, quote, I just moved here from Jersey City, and crime seems to be following me. People aren't very cautious around here. They're very lax. You're more aware in the city. You take precautions and don't go out alone at night. When I came up here, I noticed that people don't lock their doors. They're so relaxed, but crime is everywhere, end quote.
I could not imagine going to bed not locking our doors.
Literally, okay, story time. I know we are getting off on so many tangents in this episode, but this morning, John said to me, he was like, hey, babe, because I was still in bed. And he yelled up to me. He's like, oh, I had to go start my car. I'm not going to be able to lock the door. And I instantly shot up and I was like, okay,
damn it, John, now I got to get up out of bed.
And then when he left the house, I ran downstairs and I locked the door and I was like, there is no way. And it's like 7:30 in the morning. And, you know,
we have a gate that's very difficult to get in through.
Yeah, that's a lock in and of itself. But it's like just the fact that my door is unlocked makes me feel so much more vulnerable because it's just this extra layer of protection for me.
Right. And even when we open the inside door and we leave the screen door open, we lock the screen door.
Yes.
I mean, sure, could somebody, you know, cut through or blast through the screen.
But it gives me a solid 5 seconds to run for something.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's become more prevalent because, you know, people nowadays are so much more in the know of all the crazy stuff that's happening and all the potential for violence out there. Back in the day in the 80s, you just had the news that you checked at like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 5 o'clock or something
but
like that.
But I still think that that's a mindset today. For example, one of the ladies I used to work with, she never locked her doors or her windows. And then when she started listening to the podcast, she was like, my family's getting annoyed by me because every time they come over, they have to have me unlock the door now. And I was like, see, you have to be safe. And this was a woman who never locked her doors in 2021. So, you know, it's just one of those things where
it's a culture thing now.
Yeah,
though.
there are people with that mentality from back then that just never locked it. And now they still don't lock it. They're like, oh, where I live it's safe. But crime can come to you anywhere you live. If you're leaving your door open or leaving your door unlocked, you're literally like, here, come on in. No, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm all set with that.
It's just become a habit for me. I mean, even so, like with what I do, I hear so many people that, you know, have had thefts occur, this or that, or their car was broken into. Okay, did you lock your door? Oh, no. Oh, my car was stolen. Okay, did you lock the car? No. Where were the keys? They were left in the car. Like,
people leave their keys in the car.
Yes. So, I mean, again, another tangent.
Everyone listening,
whatever.
don't do that.
We're not trying to make people paranoid. We're just talking about our own habits.
It's
have never
safety.
in my 35 years not locked my car after I've gotten out of it. And generally, I always lock my door when I come in the house.
Yeah. I think it's been a minute since we've talked about personal safety, though, and it's always a good thing to reiterate.
Jinx.
Yeah, so actually that segues us perfectly into the next piece of things because, like I said, there was a ton of media coverage on personal safety, rightly so. And there was this one article that I just wanted to read for you that gave, like, you know, tips and stuff on how to stay safe back in 1983 anyway. So
I hope it doesn't say, buy a knife, adopt a large dog.
It doesn't, no.
Okay.
So it stated, quote, don't stop on the road for anyone. Be sure it's a police car pulling you over. Other vehicles can have flashing lights. Keep vehicle in gear when stopped at a light. Park in lighted areas and lock doors. Check car's interior before entering. If followed, change direction and drive to a safe location. If followed into a driveway, stay in car and blow horn. End quote.
Those are all great recommendations and things that nowadays you and I probably do unconsciously. But just to touch on the whole portion where if somebody is trying to pull you over, make sure it's the police or whatever it was you said.
Yep.
Still holds true today.
Absolutely.
Especially nowadays where you can outfit your car with whatever you want.
Definitely.
But if you don't feel safe pulling over somewhere, get on the phone, call 911 and say, hey, somebody's trying to pull me over. I'm not in a great area. I don't feel safe stopping. I don't know if it's a police officer. 911 will route you to the correct agency.
Yep.
And then you can talk to the dispatcher that will be able to relay that information to the police officer. And then when you feel safe or when you've been assured that that officer is behind you, you can pull over at that point.
Exactly. And I'm sure if you're driving normally and you're not, you know, trying to flee or anything like that, most officers would be like, okay, they're probably a little worried, or they might even see you on your phone, or yeah, you would hope so. But the one thing that stood out to me was keep your vehicle in gear when stopped at a light.
What?
Does anybody out here put their car in park when they stop at a red light? Because I have never in my life done that.
I've never done that, but the only thing I can think of is if you're driving a manual and you put it in neutral and you're just resting.
Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, that's not necessarily in gear.
Yeah.
But no, I would never. I mean, my foot is heavy enough to just rest it on the brake at a red light. I don't need to put it in park.
I feel like people put it in park when they're in drive-thrus too. And I'm like,
Yeah, I do notice that though.
Yeah, people
put
do it
in
a
park.
lot, but I've never seen anyone do it at a red light. I wonder if anybody does that. I would love to know. Tell us.
I wonder if these people learn these habits because of how they were brought up and if their parents did it before.
I bet. I definitely bet. It's like the same thing we talked about in our Halloween episode with like the checking the candy and everything.
Right,
you know,
right.
it's just something that's brought down through the generations and people just continue to do it.
So I'm going to assume that my parents never put their car in park.
But they told you that leaving the light on while driving was illegal.
Which is not.
It is not.
Technically.
PSA!
Technically, at least in Rhode Island, you are supposed to turn your interior light on after dusk when you're pulled over.
Guys, I did not know that, and I was just informed of this the other day, so very interesting. I had no idea that you were supposed to put the light on, and anytime I've been pulled over after dark, which isn't a lot of times, but I've definitely never done that, so...
Yeah, you can be cited for it.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, great. That's wonderful. I don't need an additional ticket if I were getting pulled over, so PSA to our Rhode Island friends. Yep. That's a rule. Sort of. So now we're going to move on to another media circus. And it still has to do with the fact that there are so many murders in the area. And this is something, though, that frustrated me. And I'm sure as you guys are listening, you're like, what's going on with Judy's case? Well, it was overshadowed. I'll tell you. There was so much with the personal safety stuff, all of the other murders going on. And now what I'm about to tell you about just seemed like this was the media craze. And it's like, let's talk about Judy. Let's talk about Christopher Thomas. Let's talk about all these other people who have been killed in the area. Why are we dealing with drama between two groups?
Hey, if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm.
And if you can get people riled up and in a panic and then be like the safe haven for information on how to protect yourself, that brings people back. It doesn't necessarily benefit you to say, this person was murdered this way, and this is the information, and we're trying to find it. All the media is ever looking for, I mean, it's a business.
Mm-hmm.
They need to make sure that people are tuning in and that they're coming back day after day.
Understood, but the media is necessary in solving crimes like this.
I totally agree.
And you guys will understand what I mean as we continue to work through this. So basically, it's in regards to this group called the Guardian Angels. So the national director or leader of their group, if you will, Lisa Sliwa, I think is how you pronounce it. Not 100% sure on that.
I always think about people that have like, maybe she married into that name, but like that's like Julia Gulia.
Yeah,
Lisa Sliwa.
You
know what I mean?
You always come up with the best things to say about people's
the third
last
movie
names.
reference now with over 2 episodes.
Yeah, wow. All right, but this lady clearly had some beef with the current prosecutor, and that took up so much news coverage during
Ego is
this
a terrible
time frame.
thing.
Yes. I got to say, by the time that I was done researching this case, I was fatigued by the amount of back and forth nonsense between the Guardian Angels and the prosecutor. So, just so you know, because if anybody out there goes and, does research on these cases after we do these episodes, I'm not going to not bring this up and then, have somebody be like, why didn't you touch on the Guardian Angels, Britt? But
because you did poor research, Britt.
Yeah. But I wanted to give you kind of just a brief rundown of what was going on with them. And then we're going to dive back into Judy's case. We're going to talk about potential persons of interest. We're going to get into some witness statements, tips and leads, and then we'll get into theories. So don't worry, we will be diving back into Judy's case in just a few minutes. So back to the fact that there were multiple unsolved murders in the area. Residents were worried, and rightly so. I don't know how many times we can say that throughout this episode. But apparently, residents were making many calls to this Guardian Angels group, who I guess you could call like this group of protective patrolling citizen detectives. Like,
it's like the neighborhood watch.
Yeah, like I don't even know what else to call them, but they were coming in to do their best to help quell the public's fears. They were setting up in empty mall storefronts and literally sleeping on cots there. They were patrolling the area, specifically keeping a close eye on the malls because, like we've said multiple times, lots of these murders were taking place at a mall or a shopping plaza, things like that. And I think just overall, them being around just provided this additional sense of security for the residents of Morris County.
So when you have all of these murders happening and it doesn't seem like police are getting anywhere with their investigations, what can you do besides form these small coalitions and try to help protect your own community?
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's what I was just about to say too, is that like, I thought that this group coming in and assisting wasn't a bad thing. they're this extra set of eyes to potentially see and help stop further crime from happening in the area.
Good witnesses.
Exactly. But the problem I had with this whole situation had to do with this, just like I said, media circus, this back and forth between the prosecutor's office and this organization. Basically, there were comments from Lisa to the media where she said things like, quote, "A Smurf could do a better job than Lee Trumbull," end quote. And then, of course, the next article that comes out is a response from Trumbull, like, quote, "She doesn't have a guess of what my job is about," end quote. So it's like, guys, you've got 6 murders on your hands. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
So, the other thing that was beyond annoying is like Lisa and the Guardian Angels, they're blaming. They're literally saying the prosecutor's office is the problem. They're not stopping this crime, so Trumbull should step down. I'm sorry, but what?
It's people that have an opinion on something when they know very little about something. Yeah. It's like, well, I saw this somewhere and they said this, so now I believe this and this is right.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the prosecutor's office going to do without evidence, probable cause, and the ability to charge someone in these crimes?
Exactly. So that was going to be my next question. But first, I did want to read one other quote from Lisa for you. She said, quote, "We've never taken such an aggressive approach, but law enforcement officials are desperately in need of help. Poor appearance coincides with the calls we get from residents," end quote. And I will say, she's not necessarily wrong in regards to them desperately being in need of help, because Trumbull had said that he had lost 2 to 3 assistant prosecutors in the weeks, surrounding these murders. So I would say from this October to January timeframe, people had left his office. Obviously we know they had lots of police helping with upwards of 100 investigators, but still, it seemed like they were lacking in manpower, especially when it came to both investigating 6 murders and patrolling the streets of all these towns, right?
Right. But listen, Julia.
Exactly.
All right. You don't need to puff up your chest and try to make yourself seem better or to put down these other people that you're working with. If you are really working together towards a greater goal, then you need to put aside your differences, put aside your ego, and you need to say, hey, we're citizens. What can we do to assist in your investigation? And you need to be on the same working level in order to get anywhere. You can't keep putting yourself on a pedestal above somebody or pointing blame at somebody else, because more times than not, when it comes to multiple investigations, it does not come down to one person doing something wrong. Trumbull needs to step down because he's not doing anything.
Yeah.
And especially if he's being blasted in the press and stuff like that, the heat's coming down on him, and he's not just going to be like, oh, they're right, I'm going to leave.
Exactly. And the thing about it, too, is there was one article that I was able to find that mentioned this as well. And I was like, thank you for someone finally bringing this point up outside of this, back and forth drama fest between these two, saying one dig at the other and then a dig back and all of this. It was how can the prosecutor's office and Lee Trumbull himself hold more power than the police?
No, I mean,
it's not his freaking fault.
No, Trumbull gains his power once charges have been brought.
Yes.
It ain't his fault.
It's nobody's fault except for these freaking murderers. You can't stop crime. I mean, I guess you technically can, but it's hard to stop crime like that before it even happens.
Right.
So it's just all of this, it was just overshadowing what really needed to be done. And the whole time I was reading about this, I was like, I guess, yes, this was the perfect environment for this media circus, but if they had just come together and
what is your real goal?
Worked, exactly, is your goal to get Trumbull to step down because you don't like him?
Or is your goal to make yourself look good because you're the ones that came in and you helped in the investigation and then maybe it'll be solved?
Or is your goal to actually protect the residents?
Right.
Because if that were the case, you wouldn't be telling people that a Smurf could do a better job than Lee Trumbull. Come on.
And also, you wouldn't be creating this media circus, as you called it, and taking away from all of the victims and their families that have been affected by this that are looking for answers. Exactly. By you creating all of this drama, today it would almost be like reality TV, these two people battling throughout the press.
Yep.
It's who are you here for? Are you here for yourself? Because that's what it seems like, because you're just kind of creating this drama and you're putting down this prosecutor, and then the prosecutor's coming after you because he doesn't like what you said about him. It's just, it doesn't work towards the common goal.
No, and it didn't work towards the common goal, because even with all these extra patrols and all these people taking self-defense classes and buying mace and all that to protect themselves, and with the guardian angels getting involved, the murders and attacks did not stop after Judy was killed.
Okay.
There were at least 3 more attacks in the months following Judy's murder. In February of 1983, a man was killed in a bar, but it was determined this case had no relation to Judy's, and a man ended up confessing to this murder later on. Then come early March, a woman was stabbed at the Arlington Plaza shopping center. Thankfully, this woman survived her attack, and yet again, this was another case that was determined to have no relation to Judy's. Then, in late July of 1983, another young woman was found stabbed to death in Morris County, and her body was located in a secluded area behind a baseball field in Mountain Lakes, New Jersey. From what I can tell, this case was also determined to not have any relation to Judy's. The only one that was ever really considered to potentially have any sort of connection was that of Christopher Thomas. But again, as we talked about earlier, authorities had ruled that out as being, connected. But after our conversation on the revolver, who knows? But either way, out of, 9 murders?
Over the course of at least a year, a little bit less than a year.
Yeah, less than a year, 9 to 10 months. So it's like a murder a month.
Yeah.
That is insane.
And instead of putting information out about these murders and things that can potentially help identify the criminals, you got the drama going on between the guardian angels, this Lisa lady, and then the prosecutor. It's like that totally overshadows stuff because, what's more enticing for people to read? Drama going on between people battling, or information that may be inconsequential to you because you don't know anything?
Exactly.
People like drama.
I don't like that. Like, those memes where people are like, oh, I don't want to be involved in the drama, but when there's drama, it's like I grab my wine and I watch. I'm like, I don't want to fucking watch.
I don't want to deal with it.
I'm not interested. Like, I'll just stay over here in my little bubble and enjoy, my own life. And
Bob's Burgers.
Exactly. All right. So now, after that, I was going to say little side tangent, but that was a pretty long side tangent. Let's now dive back into Judy's case. I'm sure at this point you've been chomping at the bit to find out a little bit more about what's up with Judy's husband. Was he looked into? Did police question him? Did he have an alibi? Those are all valid questions, and most of which I have answers to. So first and foremost, yes, of course police were looking into Peter Brown. But from all accounts, he was acting as any spouse would in this situation, or at least how you would expect, with him being very upset and reportedly, quote, visibly shaken. But, as in any case, authorities questioned Peter thoroughly early on, and investigators stated he was being very cooperative with them. Also, based on what I've been able to find, it does appear as though the Browns had a very normal and happy marriage. Nothing appeared to be wrong in their relationship at all. It was also reported that at Judy's funeral, Peter looked, quote, grief-stricken. And it seemed as though even the public and journalists were watching him closely to see how he'd be reacting after his wife was killed. But overall, at least to me, it seemed as though he was acting like anyone would after losing a spouse in this way. Also, speaking of Judy's funeral, it was held on January 10th, 1983 at St. Paul's Roman Catholic Church, the same church Judy and Peter had been married in 6 years prior, with over 200 people in attendance. But here's an interesting detail investigators uncovered about Peter. He owned several firearms. It was reported that he owned 4 firearms in total, all owned legally and properly licensed, and it was reported that he owned either 2 rifles and 2 shotguns, or 3 rifles and 1 shotgun. Regardless of exactly how many of each type he owned, the fact that he owned a shotgun piqued authorities' interest. Now, I'm sure your first question is, what is the gauge of the shotgun? Well, in early reporting, it was completely unclear what gauge the shotgun Peter owned was, and authorities weren't planning to release that detail to the public. But investigators did confiscate Peter's guns and brought them in for ballistics testing and, of course, to confirm the gauge of the shotgun, or multiple shotguns, depending on how many he had. to see if there may have been a match to the gun used to kill Judy. And after all of that testing, it seemed to be confirmed that Peter's guns were not a match. Also, I did see mention of him having an alibi, so I assume authorities did get some kind of confirmation of that, although we actually never find out what his alibi was. Regardless, Peter Brown was ruled out by investigators and is not considered a suspect in his wife's murder. And I do also just want to bring it up now because there just wasn't a lot of detail on it, but an ex-boyfriend of Judy's had also been looked into. It's unclear how long they had dated, what their relationship was like, or if they still kept in touch, but from all accounts, this guy seemed to have a pretty airtight alibi, and authorities ruled him out as having any involvement as well. Outside of these two individuals, it's unclear if investigators ever had any other solid suspects on their radar, and of course, they gave the age-old line of, everyone's a suspect until we find the killer. But over time, authorities did receive statements from, I believe, several witnesses, with the information from said witnesses seemingly clarifying at least some of Judy's movements the night she went missing. And due to that information received, authorities actually touted the fact that they believed they would be able to solve Judy's case before and easier than all the other cases in the area.
I have my doubts.
Yeah. We wouldn't be here today.
I know.
Discussing
I'm just
this
saying,
case if that's what happened.
Like, you never want to come out and you want to say, we're going to solve this easier than all the rest of them. Mm-hmm. Don't worry. We got it.
And then 40 years go by.
Yeah.
But regarding the witness statements, it's reported in a piece in the Asbury Park Press that Prosecutor Trumbull stated, quote, "We've received a great deal from the public in this particular homicide. People made observations concerning Mrs. Brown in the car," end quote.
When they saw her outside of work or after she was murdered?
I think after she was murdered, but that's never been fully clarified, so that's me assuming.
Okay.
But of course, yet again, it's totally unclear what these statements were, exactly what they said, when she was seen, all of that. But there were two sightings that I saw reported that I thought could kind of help with the timeline. And this was a question you had last episode, John, in regards to when was the car seen in the parking lot? So, before we discuss those, though, I do just want to mention that authorities did take Judy's picture around to employees at the mall to see if she'd actually ever been in the mall, like if she was shopping or if she stopped at a restaurant or something like that. But unfortunately, I just don't know if anybody had seen her, what came from those efforts. But from what I've gathered, it appears as though the first time anyone noticed Judy's car in the mall parking lot was around 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday night, January 4th. And then the manager of Beefsteak Charlie's, the restaurant's parking lot where Judy's car was found, mentioned that he'd seen her car in the lot around 12:30 a.m. when he was leaving work. So I would guess, based on those two statements, that Judy was likely deceased by this point and the car had been locked up and left there.
I mean, you have to assume that.
Absolutely.
Because what are the odds that that car would be there during both of these times if these statements are accurate, leave, and then be brought back to that spot later on?
It's not.
It's like slim to none.
Yeah, exactly. So to go back to those statements made by the prosecutor and authorities, regarding how they believe Judy's case was going to be solved quickly, they were clearly a bit overzealous because, first of all, like I said a minute ago, we would not be here today if that is what happened. And within a week or so, the prosecutor's office was completely backtracking on their previous comments. The Daily Record reported, quote, "We had some information presented to us about her car being there at Arlington Plaza at certain times, but the value of that information was not what we expected," end quote. Another overconfident comment authorities had made was that they believed there was a direct motive for Judy's murder. Of course, it's unclear exactly what that was, but they were sure that there was a motive and they'd be able to definitively define it. But yet again, this comment is totally backtracked on later, and authorities said that they just couldn't pin down a motive in her case.
I'm totally lost as to why they would be giving these statements without information, knowing that they can back them up. Because nowadays, at least, and as a society we progress and as agencies learn more information and understand the press more, they progress as well, and they give out less nowadays because they know that it's better to give less. And then when you have a certain conclusion that you have come to, then you give information when you have data to back it up.
Yeah.
But to say, oh, we're going to solve this, no problem, and then be like, oh, the information we had was crap. And then to say, we know that there was a motive here. And then to say, I don't think we have a motive. That's like...
So maybe Lisa Sliwa was not all that wrong.
Yeah, maybe Julia Gulia wasn't wrong.
Yeah, I love that you're calling her that. That's hilarious. But this whole talk about, not being able to pin down the motive, but they thought they would be able to definitively define it, this whole thing, it makes me want to go back to robbery as an option. We had talked about it earlier. We said keep it in the back of our minds. We've left it in the back of our minds for an entire week now until this second part has come out, and I want to bring it up again. So by the time the 1-year anniversary of Judy's murder came around, so this is January of 1984, authorities said they did not believe robbery was the motive.
I'm shaking my head because I don't believe it either.
Yeah, but it just makes me wonder, why were all these random comments coming out about things being taken? She had no valuables left in her purse, all of this. Why? I
bring things back to a basic level. We know from last episode that Judy was a very communicative person. Mm-hmm. We know that if she was going to go somewhere, if she didn't tell her husband over the phone, she would have left a note somewhere. We know that she spoke to her husband roughly an hour to, let's say, an hour and a half prior to him arriving home and her being gone. By this time in the night, it was dark out. Weather could have been bad. It's not like she had to go somewhere to pick something up because she could have told her husband to pick it up. So my whole thing is if she left the house, is there the chance that somebody could have lured her out? Yes, but I feel like that's so small. I feel like if she left with the intent of knowing, because she just talked to her husband, that she could go do something, meet up with somebody, and return home prior to his arrival.
Yeah. That's what it seems like to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, based on this story, we're kind of back at square one where it's we don't know enough about really anything to say for sure, I can hang my hat on this. But there is one thing that authorities appear to be pretty sure of. They seem to be sure by the 1-year anniversary. They seem to be sure recently is that whoever killed Judy was someone she knew. Which directly coincides to exactly what John just said. So he may very well be correct in thinking that she left to go meet with someone to do something, who knows what it was, but authorities are sure that whoever she was meeting with was someone she knew.
Yes, and then whoever she was meeting with, she told them something that they did not like, that they did not agree with, or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
That caused them to want her to not be able to say whatever it is that she just told them to anyone else. And again, I guess it's not totally baseless because we have very little to go on as far as what's been released to the public. But if there was the chance of infidelity going on and she was meeting up with somebody that she had been seeing on the side because her husband was so busy with the business, not only that he worked at part-time that he owned, but also working full-time as this electronic engineer elsewhere. I mean, he's a busy guy. A woman has needs, blah, blah, blah.
You guys hear this right now?
Hey, I'm just keeping it real.
John's always keeping it real.
And who knows if she was talking to somebody else and it seemed like it was this good thing going because, oh, I have a husband, I have something to lose. You have a wife, you have something to lose. Blah, blah, blah. Like we have a common thing where we're just trying to get whatever it is out of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happens. I don't know.
I just found it to be interesting that you brought it up as an option, and I wasn't going to say anything before until now as we moved closer to the theories, because I'll say this is the one and only thing I've seen anyone bring up online is that could this have been a lover, a lover's tryst or something? Why else would she have been leaving the house? But again, it's by all accounts, their marriage was great. By, all accounts, neighbors all said they seemed like a very happy couple. But you also don't know what's going on in somebody's household.
Exactly. You don't know what's going on in somebody's head. How many celebrities have we seen that always have a smile on their face?
Yeah.
When they're in public, when their paparazzi catch them and everything, And then all of a sudden we find out they died by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can only take what's put out to the public at face value. You can't necessarily take it as gospel.
Yeah.
So, is it a possibility? I mean, I think it is. And I think, based on the facts that we have, it seems as though whoever killed her knew her.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as though if she had left her house after just getting off the phone with her husband, knowing that he's going to be home within roughly maybe an hour or so, and she didn't ask him to stop anywhere to get anything, I can't say that I would assume that she would leave to go pick something up, like for dinner or for whatever.
Yeah.
So she must have been doing something where either she was trying to surprise her husband or something that she didn't want him to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever transpired. And it just seems like a very,
like I said,
believable story or outcome to think that, based on what investigators have put out to the public and what we know about Judy,
nothing else seems to make sense.
Right. Nothing else really seems to fit.
And like I said before, a crime of passion.
Yes.
This does not seem like a crime of opportunity. It doesn't seem like a planned out crime.
Right. Now, a crime of passion doesn't necessarily need to be in line with something like our Stacey Burns episode where she was stabbed 20-something times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there can be a crime of passion that occurs because of the flip of a switch based on something happening, and it just...
Yes.
That's just what happens. It's
just,
not
it's
like...
the heat of the moment. You can't even control yourself, and you do this horrible thing.
Right, when you feel as though there's, your back's against the wall and there's nothing else you can do. Is it right? Obviously, no, it's wrong. Like, you put yourself in that position for that to happen, so you can't just take somebody's life because, you fucked up. But
yeah, I agree. All right, so now we're going to fast forward a little bit to late 1984. So in November, a woman named Teresa Caucus was sexually assaulted and shot to death in a wooded area in Windsor, New York. She'd been hunting with her husband, and he'd left her alone in this area. I guess while he worked to try and get deer to come towards her. I don't really know how that works, but they were hunting, and I guess that's just what they did. So when he arrived back, she was gone, but he'd heard gunshots in the general vicinity. And as he was trying to find his wife, he passed by another hunter and asked that man if he'd heard anything, to which this guy was like, yeah, I heard gunshots, and he pointed, in the direction of which he heard them. After, searching, whatever, her husband couldn't find her, but the following day, Teresa's body was found, and it was confirmed she'd been shot to death with a shotgun. Thankfully, though, her killer was apprehended about a week and a half after she was killed. And it turned out to be that man that Teresa's husband had walked by in the woods that day. And his name was Arthur Hildreth.
I mean, how many people can be in the woods hunting deer at the same time?
I mean, it seemed like it was hunting season, like deer season, so there were a lot of people, but...
I get that, but also in deer hunting season, you don't have 13 hunters in the same general area.
Yes,
because,
okay, I'll give you that.
But what a perfect thing for Arthur to say is, oh yeah, I heard gunshots over in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, affirm what this person's saying to you and say, oh yeah, I heard them. And then send them in either a different direction or whatever from where you just shot this person.
And then you walk away and leave,
you walk
right?
away. Right?
Yeah.
And hope that nobody ever makes a connection. But luckily, there was a connection made.
Yes. So after the trial happened, it turned out that he allegedly, this Arthur guy, forced Teresa to perform oral sex on him and then shot her with his shotgun, even though in his appeals he says that he accidentally shot her, but then shot her several more times. But it was found to be murder. It wasn't like an accident in the woods shooting, they're hunting deer, that kind of thing. It was determined to be murder, and he was found guilty and sentenced to, I believe, 25 years in prison. And I'm sure you're probably like, Britt, why are you even telling me about this case? This was in New York a year after Judy's, but I wanted to bring it up because it was mentioned a few times that Hildreth was being looked into in relation to Judy's case because he was from Parsippany, New Jersey, and he also owned shotguns, and he had used a shotgun in the murder of Teresa. But it does seem as though authorities did rule him out, especially because the shotgun gauge didn't match.
That's fair then.
So, they said it does not seem as though he had any involvement in Judy's murder. So now, fast forward again, this time to the following year, 1985. And there was this new technology available that the state and county was hoping to get their hands on. And this technology was something that I guess no other agency in the state of New Jersey had at the time. And it was reportedly called the Laser Print Finder, which is essentially this device that could pick up fingerprints on non-conventional items like styrofoam, wood, aluminum foil, things like that. But according to a piece written by Brian Murray for the Daily Record, authorities were requesting approval in order to purchase this laser fingerprint detector, as back in '85, this thing cost $37,000, which today amounts to a little over $102,000.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for like one agency to fork over.
Yeah, exactly. But from what I can tell, it does seem as though they were able to get the device a little over a year later. And around the summer of 1986, it was reported that investigators were sending additional evidence found at the scene of Judy Brown's murder to, whatever agency had ended up getting this fingerprint device, and they were going to be testing it with the new technology.
So you assume that they seized evidence from Judy's crime scene, kept that evidence, and then once this new technology came out, they were like, hey, we have these objects. Can we send them to you to see if you can pull prints from them?
Correct, yes. And also around this same time, investigators continued to conduct interviews of new people in relation to Judy's case, but were also re-interviewing people that they had already spoken to in hopes of gleaning more information from them. And again, at this point, it was now about like 3.5 years since Judy had been killed. Investigators were still saying to the press and the media that they were pretty dang set in their belief that Judy knew her killer. So, you can just tell at this point, this is at least one of the main things that they're willing to tell the public, and that they seem to have hung their hat on, is that there was some sort of relationship there where they at least knew each other in some capacity.
I wonder what they did to try and narrow down who this person could have been. Obviously, you have a spouse. You have coworkers. Did she take part in a club? Like, where would she have gone to meet this person, to build a relationship, to then allow them to hang their hat on that she knew her killer?
The only thing that pops into my mind is someone from church, because they were very involved in their church. They attended services there. We know that they had been married and her funeral was in the same church.
That goes along with the idea that if infidelity was a factor and she had been talking to somebody and then one or the other was willing to oust what was going on to their significant other or their partner or whatever, like that's frowned upon throughout the church.
At least the Catholic Church.
Right.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so I was just thinking like the church was like this big thing, her family was relatively religious. I know she went to the Catholic school when she was young.
Makes me think of Candy.
Yes. Yes, I can see that. I was just sitting here like trying to like envision all of the different things that like happened in that. But yeah, I mean.
That's where they met. Just for reference, so you guys know what we're talking about. Candy, the show that came out on Hulu.
Based on a true story.
Based on a true story. You had Jessica Biel and you had, I think, Pablo Schreiber, who were both in their own family relationships and stuff like that. And then they end up having an intimate relationship and an affair and stuff and blah, blah, blah. But I'm pretty sure that they had met through church.
Yeah, so that was like the one thing that stood out to me is, could this have potentially been a relationship that was built within the church? And maybe it just started out as a friendship. And then,
if there even was one.
Exactly.
But it seems as though this makes the most sense.
There's literally no other theories.
So this is the only theory that's been put out, like people have talked about publicly through forums, and that maybe people have hinted at through news segments or publications or anything.
The only place that I've ever seen it is on Reddit. And of course, Reddit is not
the best
super
source.
Reliable. Yeah. But, it's still like-minded people thinking about these cases, and the one Reddit thread on this case, because again, guys, I'm covering cases that are not highly publicized.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I had like 6 or 7 pages of sources on Judy Brown's case, but that's also because there were 9 murders in the area. So,
she was lumped into all these other cases, and it's like
exactly.
You have a bunch of articles, a whole batch of articles that come up as attached to her, but that mention no information about her particular murder.
Exactly. It was like, so-and-so was killed on this date, this is what happened, and the other murders in the area were Christopher Thomas, Judy Brown, blah, blah, blah. So like, weeding through all of that, as much as it seemed like this case might have been highly publicized when I first dove into it, it really was not. And, when you've only got one Reddit thread and no Web Sleuths thread on a case, that goes to show that it's one that is underreported and one that deserves to be talked about on our show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, that's why I really wanted to cover it. But to go back to the whole laser print detector thing, I haven't been able to find any reporting on any findings that they were able to get from that testing. And literally it was like 30 some odd years ago now at this point. You would think that if anything came from it, or if they found a print or something like that, you would probably know by now.
Right. Either you would know because they came forward and they said that they found something, or you would have seen movement in the case towards some type of prosecution.
Exactly. So also around this same like 1984, 1985 time frame, I guess a serial killer in prison down in Florida had confessed to killing Judy. I had seen comments that it was potentially Henry Lee Lucas. That's what was,
Henry
listed.
Lee Lucas, man, the confession killer?
Yes. So he was mentioned in like a bunch of news articles. But then some Reddit users were mentioning that he was never in prison in Florida. So if it was the person that they were thinking, they were saying like, oh, it was probably Otis Toole who made this confession. Either way, even if it was Henry Lee Lucas, if it was Otis Toole, it doesn't really matter because it was determined that whoever had confessed had like no ties to the area, wasn't around there at the time, and was just willy-nilly confessing to something for no good reason. So nothing matched up and that lead went nowhere. And over the following years, not much has been reported in Judy's case outside of a few anniversary articles and rewards posted in local papers for information. And then there was one article in 2005 that was written about Judy's case, but no new information was provided in that piece outside of the fact that the cold case unit was requesting help in solving her murder. And then the only other recent piece I could find that even mentioned Judy was one from 2018 on like the localpatch.com site. And it discussed the fact that there were still 28 unsolved homicides in Morris County, and 3 of which include Judy's, and then 2 others that we talked about earlier, James Wesco and Christopher Thomas. Their cases have still, to this day, never been solved 40 years later. So I don't think there's really a need to go over theories because we're just going to end up rehashing the same thing that,
right.
John has come up with as we've worked through these past 2 episodes.
But what did you come up with? Because you're the one that researched all of this and you saw this firsthand. Where did you kind of end up as far as like what you believe could or may have happened?
The only thing, so I wrote them all down here, and the first one was Arthur Hildreth. I needed to look into him. Once I looked into him, did not seem likely to me. A serial killer. Obviously, we know we had that weird confession, and nothing came from that. And the only other thing that I had in my mind was like some sort of lover that she might have had, and that was strictly because some random person mentioned it on Reddit. But then, John obviously brought it up before I even had the chance to. So, the fact that he was able to take certain aspects of this case and kind of determine that made me lean more that way. But at the end of the day, I really have no freaking clue where I land here.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say, I bet my life savings that, it was a lover and there was some type of extramarital affair going on. But if I had to come up with some type of idea on what I believe happened based on what's been put out there, I mean, it makes the most sense.
I agree,
She met up with somebody that she knew. Something happened between the two of them, and whoever she had met up with decided to kill her.
And I think even if it's not some sort of infidelity or anything like that, at the end of the day, she very clearly seemed to be, at least in my opinion, to be meeting somebody that she knew to do whatever. Who knows what it was? Maybe she just wanted to like buy a special gift for her husband. Like, I have no idea, but whatever happened in that instance with this person that she knew, something went bad and that person killed her. And I think that's, where I land, sort of.
Yeah, I think I sort of land in that same area. I think I more or less land more that she could have been seeing somebody else, and if one of them wanted to break things off, and then they ended up, murdering her because of that, it just seems the most realistic, I guess.
That's fair to say, especially based on the lack of information we've got.
Yeah, and I mean, it also lends to the idea that this is not somebody that's in the system.
Yep.
This is somebody that maybe from church that lives a very, devout, quote unquote, life. They put out that persona that, oh, I am a godly person. I go to church. I have my family, this, that, the other thing. That they'd be like the last suspect to look at.
Because I've seen that before in the true crime world where someone has committed a crime and never done it again.
Yeah.
Because I think it goes back to what we said before.
That's how you get away with the crime that you just did. You never do anything bad again.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason for you to be in the system. There's no reason for people to collect your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that nobody in your family ever does 23andMe.
Yes. But then you just have to think, like, it goes back to what I said before. This just is clear to me that this is a crime of passion. This is a heat of the moment, spur of the moment. I just made a bad decision, but what am I going to do to make sure I don't get caught?
I'm going to cover up. I'm going to take the keys. I'm going to lock the door, and I'm going to try and distance myself from this.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me.
I wonder what our listeners think after hearing, both episodes on this.
This was not supposed to be a two-parter, guys, and this went much longer than expected. John had a lot of opinions on this case, which I think is good. I mean, I'm curious, do you guys like two-parters? Do you like these super deep dives where we talk about all these additional aspects, or do you want me to streamline it and, not talk so much? I mean, I feel like you guys wouldn't stick around if you didn't like it, but who knows?
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's very difficult to produce 1 3-hour episode.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I love you all, but we are not putting out 3-hour-long episodes because I myself would never sit there and listen to one.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Like, if I can get, an hour to an hour and a half episode, maybe close to an hour and 50 minutes or something.
That's ideal.
And then come
for
back
me,
next time and kind of rehash what happened before and then get into more of it. And then I can kind of make that connection. I mean, that's why there are TV series out there.
I feel like
you don't have to tell the whole story. Right.
And you'll be like, oh my God, guys, stop talking. 3 hours is too much. I'll listen to you next week. So,
right.
But we'd love to know what you guys think. And again, we want to know what you think about this case.
Yeah.
As of the time of this episode's release, it has been just over 40 years since Judy Brown was senselessly murdered, and her killer has still not been apprehended. So please, if you know anything about what happened to Judy, please contact the Morris County Prosecutor's Office at 973-285-6200. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.